Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before I start the presentation, I would like to express my thanks to the Deputy Chief Executive, the Head of Finance, and all the finance team who have put these documents together, answered many questions on them, and accomplished this all despite all the delays and changes from central government. It's even more of an achievement than usual. As an indication of the delays, the final Commons debate on council tax referendums, which we rely upon, and the annual financial settlement only took place on Monday evening. And yes, fortunately, all the provisional figures and concessions for referendums have been agreed. As I said, it's my pleasure to present the revenue and capital budgets and other related items, including the medium-term financial strategy, which takes a longer-term look at the Council's finances. The background to this presentation is that despite the uncertainties and difficulties which we as a Shire District Council experience, we have kept the promises we made to the electorate in the run-up to the elections, as the leader has just described in his remarks. Our aim now is to continue these policies and practices into the coming year, and accordingly we're proposing a net budget of £18.7 million for 2021. This figure is up by just over £1 million compared to that presented last year, largely as a result of increased spending pressures of over £2 million, the most significant part of which relates to staff costs, including pension costs following on from the triennial actuarial review. Savings and extra income at just under £600,000 have been difficult to achieve and to nail down on a sustainable basis given all the uncertainties at the national and international level. The net impact of all this is that our gross drawdown of reserves is budgeted at £972,000 compared to £436,000 last year. Fortunately, as a council, we have built up our reserves over the years, with the result that we estimate that at the end of the coming financial year, i.e. at end March 2021, we will still have £18.1 million of revenue reserves, and that's without including either the £4 million general fund balance or the £18 million of SIL funds. This gives us the comfort of time over the next 12 months to see how best we can reduce and ultimately eliminate our reliance on drawing on reserves. I should say at this point that we are not alone in using reserves to balance the budget next year. I noticed that among our Surrey neighbours, Reigate and Banstead will be using about £1.25 million of revenue reserves to help balance their 2021 budget. So turning to the actual recommendations on the agenda paper, recommendation D is that we agree a staff pay award of 2.5% or £750, whichever is the greater, to be implemented with effect from 1st of April 2020. As ever, this is a compromise between what we can realistically afford and what we feel our staff deserve. The figure of 2.5% is marginally above the current CPI level, 1.8%, but also marginally below the 3.2% recent average for wages growth in England. We also believe that in putting in a minimum of £750 per annum as a minimum level should make the overall package more attractive to up-and-coming, often younger members of staff, and hopefully have a beneficial effect on staff turnover rates. This £750 minimum will benefit all staff with an annual salary of less than £30,000, and staff earning less than £25,000 will have the equivalent of at least a 3% increase on their salary. And as the leader mentioned, there will be an extra day's leave for staff on their birthday or as near as possible thereafter. Recommendations B and C are that we approve the additional spending pressures of £1.373 million as set out in section 4.6 of the Cabinet report, and that we approve the additional income and savings totalling £594,000 as set out in paragraph 7 of the report. Logically, this leads on to recommendation A, which is that the council tax preset for Band D properties should be agreed at £226.30, an increase of £5 or 2.26%. This is the maximum that the government will allow boroughs and districts such as ourselves to raise their precepts without having to go to a referendum. Given the spending pressures we are facing, we feel that we have no realistic alternative. And indeed, the government's core spending power figures are all based on the assumption that all boroughs and districts will go for the maximum £5. Over the last few days, I've had a look at what increases our neighbouring Surrey boroughs and districts are proposing, or now in some cases have actually approved. 8 of the 10 other Surrey borough and district authorities, Epsom and Ewell, Guildford, Mole Valley, Reigate and Banstead, Runnymede, Surrey Heath, Cambridge and Woking, are all going for either £5 or £4.95. And only Spelthorne and Waverley are proposing less than 2%, at 1.29% and 1.9% respectively. So what we're doing is basically in line with everyone else's experience at the moment. The recommendations N to T deal with the technical aspects of approvals of the precepts set by Surrey County Council, Surrey Police, Elmbridge Borough Council and Claygate Parish Council. Surrey County Council will be increasing their overall precept, i.e. including that element for the social care budget, by the maximum allowable without referendum of 3.99%. This will amount to a £57.96p increase for a Band D property. Surrey Police will be increasing their precept by the maximum possible without referendum of £10 a year, an increase of 3.84%. And if we agree the £5 increase that the Cabinet has been recommending, then the overall council tax payable for a Band D property will increase to £2,008.33, an increase of 3.8%. Claygate residents will pay the usual extra £14.15 for a Band D property. Elmbridge's share of the overall bill will reduce to only 11.3% of the total. And I think you will all agree that our proposed council tax increase is a moderate proposal, less than the 2.9% that went through last year, and justified by the unprecedented circumstances we find ourselves in. Recommendation E is that we approve the new capital bids for 2021, 21-22 and 22-23 as set out in Appendix G on pages 165 and 166 of tonight's agenda. Detailed commentaries on the bids have been in the members' room for the past 2 weeks. Overall, there are 17 bids, which come to just under £1 million for next year, excluding the £1 million provisional allocation for funding for possible asset investments. These 17 bids cover a wide spectrum of activities and include up to £470,000 over the next 3 years for spending on works to improve the energy performance of a number of our buildings, and then getting energy performance certificates for these buildings so that we know by how much we're reducing energy use and thus getting closer to our target of net zero carbon emissions by 2030. Recommendation F is to approve the revenue estimates for 2021 as summarised at Appendix I on page 167. That brings all the summary budgets together in the usual format. Recommendation G is to consider and approve the medium-term financial strategy and statement of reserves as set out in Appendices J and K, pages 169 to 195. These analyse the pressures that we face in the medium term and the resources that we have built up to manage such outturns. There is, as I've probably said before, great uncertainty around local government finances currently, with government about to consult on a fair funding review, a review of business rates, a review of the new homes bonus scheme, and possibly also looking at the possibility of an entirely new housing incentive scheme. The 26 pages of the medium-term financial strategy and the schedule of revenue reserves create as good a picture of our current financial state as can be arrived at, given all the uncertainties that surround us. Importantly, the MTFS, the strategy, also sets out our commitment that there will be a root and branch review of all the service areas in 2020. Recommendation 8 is simply a request that should our interest income earned during the year exceed what we've budgeted for, then any surplus should go to the interest equalisation account, and if we undershoot our target, then the shortfall should be made up by drawing down on the same interest equalisation account. This is a continuation of existing practice. Recommendation I is that we agree to additional staff at the housing companies. You've just seen the minutes of the shareholder committee meeting. It's really growing very usefully. With costs of up to £125,000 funded from the 2021 New Homes Bonus allocation. Recommendation J is to delegate authority to respond to any consultation relating to the fair funding review to the Strategic Director Resources in consultation with the portfolio holder for resources. Recommendation K is to delegate authority to the Strategic Director Resources in consultation with the portfolio holder resources on whether to prepay secondary pension fund contributions as detailed in section 4.6. This is being closely looked into to see whether it would be advantageous, and I understand that at least 2 other authorities have decided to enter into a similar arrangement. Recommendation L is to approve the pay policy statement for 2021 as attached to Appendix L to these minutes as required under the Localism Act. This is very similar to the one approved last year and is needed for transparency as to our pay policies and practices. The statement goes on our website. And finally, recommendation M is that the Claygate Parish grant of £2,730 in respect of the localisation of council tax benefits continues to be included in the Elmbridge budget. I do appreciate that this has been a fairly rapid canter through the revenue and capital budget proposals. I'm happy to take questions if necessary. Head of Finance is smiling there. I'll ask him to supply the details. Otherwise, I recommend we add our support to all the recommendations A to T as set out on pages 95 to 100 of tonight's agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sadler. Councillor Mrs Mitchell. Councillor Sadler, your mic. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Sadler. There is an additional recommendation that I would propose, recommendation U, that a full review of the Council's fees, charges and services shall be undertaken in the 2021 municipal year with the objective of eliminating, so far as possible, the funding gaps forecast on page 17 of the medium-term financial strategy as reported to Cabinet on the 12th of February 2020. It only takes a glance at the budget papers to realise that this council's expenditure exceeds its income by around £1 million. In order to balance our budget as required by law, the difference has been taken from reserves. The funding gap in the budget in 3 years' time is forecast to be £5 million. This year, both our Chief Financial Officer and our external auditors have reported something most of us surely realise, that funding revenue expenditure from reserves, whilst a quick and simple option, is clearly not sustainable. Our auditors have also stated that they will be closely monitoring our use of reserves. Misuse of reserves is a recipe for disaster. I will not go into details of our capital expenditure position, which is equally depressing. Clearly, this is why we have seen nothing in the budget relating to one of this council's key priorities, notably our declaration to become carbon neutral by 2030. I recall last year when we were the administration, the opposition voted against our budget because they preferred a lower increase than we proposed in council tax. If that financially imprudent action had succeeded, we would have an even greater deficit this year. I am not playing party politics by doing the same with this budget, because I am aware that by law a balanced budget has to be produced by the 10th of March. This administration now should have taken firm and decisive action last year to undertake a root and branch review of our finances. Sadly, this was not done, and now it is too late for this budget. Last September, the politically proportionate Performance and Finance Panel unanimously proposed that a working group be formed to undertake a full review of fees, charges and services, with the aim of being able to balance our budget in future years without resorting to reserves as a matter of course. Regrettably, this proposal was not accepted by the Cabinet. And that is the problem with this budget. We are in a hole, still digging, and we have no plans to get out of it. We simply must get to grips with our finances so that we can continue to provide the services that our residents expect. That is why I am proposing the additional recommendation that you see before you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Mitchell. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Ms Brown.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to second the motion, and I would like to reserve my right to speak once I've seen what the administration's response is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Sadler. Yes?
Thank you, Madam. I read the proposal when I came into the chamber earlier this evening, and really I'm surprised. We have said, and indeed the minutes that we've just approved of the Cabinet meeting of 8th of January basically said we accept the recommendations from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. They're on pages, I think, 44, 46 to 46. The problem is, frankly, with central government. The budget that we are setting tonight at 18.7 million is actually less than the budget which was set by this council exactly 10 years ago when the other side were in power. So in 10 years, we've actually gone down in terms of the amount of money we spend, despite something like a 4.5% increase in population and, of course, the inflation over that period. That's where the problems lie. We will, of course, be looking into how we can get out of that, how we can get out of having to use reserves. But we have to be aware of all the things which are coming down our way over the next 12 months. I listed them. We've got the Fair Funding Review. The Secretary of State, Mr. Jenrick, in the Commons debate, attacked Labour people for trying to work out what was happening with the Fair Funding Review and where the impacts would be when the consultation hasn't even gone out yet. And I sympathise with him. I feel I'm in the same situation with your comments. I don't want to overplay the situation that we're in. In the commentary, in the medium-term financial statement, there is a section in bold which says the Section 1.5 officer confirms that for the period of the MTFS, which is 4 years starting on the 1st of April, the Council has adequate revenue reserves. However, once the implications of business rates retention and fair funding review are known, the reserves will need to be reviewed for their adequacy. We've got to take these things in a proper order. That is what we are proposing. We frankly do not need this recommendation. It was covered in the Cabinet minutes of 8th of January, and it's been covered in our recommendations and what I've been saying tonight. That's all recorded. So my recommendation is we do not approve this extra recommendation. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sadler. Councillor Mrs Lake, did you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I hadn't planned to, and I know many of us say that, but when the Finance and Performance panel sent their recommendation from their September meeting to overview and scrutiny, it was debated, and it was not necessary for overview and scrutiny to send a recommendation to Cabinet, because it was overview and scrutiny that was asked to set up a group to assist the finance panel with this forward programme. because auditors and the finance panel had serious concerns with regards to our future budget. The fact is, we all know we have a problem with our future budget. Nobody can deny that. There is an incredible amount of work that goes into it, but when you're asked as a committee to help with regards to this, and remembering overview and scrutiny is completely proportional as a make-up as a committee, as a courtesy and to show we were working together, a recommendation was sent to Cabinet. Councillor Sadler has said that it is minuted that they gave support. In actual fact, listening very careful, and of course it is webcast, you will hear the support was that go into our forward programme to be discussed and made up with the whole council, and the meeting is on the 2nd of June. Had we waited to go to the 2nd of June, as I explained to the next overview and scrutiny committee, what would have happened was it would have come to a later ONS committee, which would agree a working party. That working party would have to have terms of reference. We looked at the timescales. It would possibly be working for the beginning of August. Yet, to be of any assistance to officers of this council, recommendations and suggestions would need to be made before they'd possibly been able to meet more than once. Overview and scrutiny at their last meeting before last agreed that it was necessary. That was a cross-party decision on overview and scrutiny. Members voted to actually set up a task group to assist finance panel. And it's already met and started working on its terms of reference, so that when it's reconstituted, never mind who is on Cabinet or anything else, when it's reconstituted after the election, it can immediately start working. It will be ready to start working on this problem that we have. Just that everything was in hand. I'm sorry, it is a bit misleading, and there may have been support for the Cabinet, but its support was a bit loose in the fact that it would not have been of any assistance to officers of this council to work on a budget for 2021.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Lake. Councillor Lewis is next.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I mean, what we have before us this evening and what we're being asked to approve is a hugely irresponsible budget that has the potential to jeopardise the long-term finances of this council. Not only are we being asked to approve a £5 increase on the council tax for Band D properties, but far more concerning, as we've heard repeatedly, we're being asked to agree to fund a shortfall in our income from reserves to the tune of almost £1 million. The issue of using our reserves in this way was addressed by Grant Thornton, our external auditors, in their annual letter last year.
Madam Mayor, on a point of order.
Councillor Mrs. Lake, can you not interrupt Councillor Lewis?
I thought we were talking to the motion and not the budget.
We are talking to the motion,
We are.
Councillor Lake.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Lake. Would you keep to the motion, please, Councillor
Certainly,
Lewis?
and the external auditors made it quite clear, and they said that we will continue to review any reliance placed on the continued use of reserves for ongoing expenditure. It's important you achieve a strong financial position for the medium term. And Madam Mayor, this budget not only relies on our reserves for ongoing expenditure, but it doesn't leave the council in a strong financial position.
Councillor Lewis, I'm just going to stop you at that point. We're just talking about the additional U.
And the reason, Madam Mayor, why we need to understand the background is to understand why it is important that this council approves the motion proposed by Councillor Mitchell. We need to have this thorough review of the fees, the charges and the services to identify how we can close this funding gap. And the reason why we have the funding gap is because the administration has been highly irresponsible in terms of how it has put together the budget, and the fact that over the last 12 months, decisions have been made which are contrary to the advice of the external auditor and contrary to the advice that we've had from the Section 151 officer.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lewis.
So can I just complete?
If it's just about this particular
So,
motion.
as I say, I think it's clear that we must conduct a detailed review of the council's fees, the charges, the services. And this has got to be done with urgency, so that by the time a budget has been set by 2021-22, we know where the action has to be taken. If this motion is proposed tonight and is passed, this work could in fact begin immediately. And I think that this is the first step that is needed to return the council to a sound financial position.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Thank you. Councillor Burley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do wish to address a matter that's not directly related to the motion, so you may wish to deal with that first, but I
We're
concede
just
to you
taking those who wish to speak on the amendment.
on the motion. Thank you.
Would you like to keep your powder dry till later?
I will keep my powder dry.
Right, thank you very much. Councillor Houston wanted to speak, and then Councillor Mrs. Elmer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't actually want to speak about the motion. I wanted to speak about overviewed scrutiny and
Right.
what Councillor Lake has just said, so I will...
Save that till later.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mrs. Elmer. Are you talking about additional recommendation?
Madam Mayor, I do intend to speak to the motion.
Right.
Councillor Mitchell and Councillor Brown have put forward the motion before us on the order paper at U. And I'm going to repeat it because actually it's really important that we know what we're actually talking about. Councillor Mitchell is proposing that a full review of the Council's fees, charges and services shall be undertaken in the 2020-21 municipal year with the objective of eliminating as far as possible the funding gaps on page 17 of the medium-term financial
We've got a
strategy.
copy
We know
of it.
this. This is what we're talking about now. Every year that I remember that I've been on this council since 2006, every year we go through the fees and charges. Every year we look at everything with a fine-tooth comb. Every year, and I feel like this is a broken record, I did this on Cabinet, every year we look at this and we look at it to find out if we need to put fees and charges up. This gets done every year. And so what Councillor Mitchell is asking for is something that is already being done routinely by our officers who are excellent, and by the administration and by the opposition through the overview and scrutiny system. So I feel this is something which is being done already. It's not necessary to have it as a recommendation, and I feel that we should say no to this recommendation for that reason. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Elmer. Councillor Mrs. Elmer. Anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Chain.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Is this to the additional recommendation?
Very much.
Correct, thank you.
I'm sorry, but I do believe that Mrs. Elmer has slightly got the wrong end of the stick here. Yes, she is absolutely right in saying that every year we look at fees and charges, how much it's going to cost to go into the leisure centre, how much we're going to charge for Meals on Wheels, etc. But if she reads the motion, she'll see it's fees, charges and services. And I think what the motion is basically saying is that this council has got to look at the services that it provides, the level of those services, and if those services are statutory, whether the fees and charges being made for those services are actually adequate and correct to give a return to the council. Now, three words, fees, charges and services. The most important word of those is services, the services that this council gives and how efficiently they're given and the right fees and charges to make for that. So I will support the motion this evening because, yes, Councillor Mrs. Lake was quite right. We did set up the committee, or the working group rather, which met last night. This is part of something that it will probably be looking at, but I think, it goes a lot further than that. I will speak a little later, I think, on other matters, but I will be supporting this, and I do really want people to understand that it's a far more in-depth investigation actually into the services and how efficient those services are being run. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Chain. Does anybody else wish to speak to this particular additional recommendation proposed by Councillor Mrs Mitchell? Leader.
Thank you, Madam. Just a brief comment. There's nothing in this recommendation that says who will have the responsibility for making this. If you're saying that we, or whoever is in the administration, ought to be doing it, as Councillor Elmer says, we're already doing that. That is it's the responsibility of the administration, and we have to respond to what the government tells us to do. Now, you're not suggesting that we make decisions without knowing what the final outcome, as Councillor Sedler says, of all these government reviews on business rates, fair funding, new homes bonus. These are all built in by our officers into their advice to us and to any administration as to what the best way of delivering the services. Do you not think, like you, when you were in administration last year, challenge the officers, challenge yourselves as to what is the best way of delivering the services? We want to improve the services for our residents, not cut them. And we have to look at ways of doing it. That's part and parcel of us being in administration, of any administration. So I feel like Councillor Sadler and Councillor Elmer, this is superfluous. It rather undermines whoever is in the administration, undermines the officers and all their attempts to help us come up with a balanced budget for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Does anybody else wish to add before Councillor Brown? No? Thank you, Councillor Brown. I know you wanted to finish.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. When the Leader began his speech this evening before Councillor Sadler took over, he talked a great deal about what he had done over the first 2 years of his administration and then the most recent year. He talked about climate, environment and local plan. And I heard a whisper from the front bench which said, "What's this got to do with the budget?" And I'm afraid that is the problem. The problem is that we have heard tonight about the supposed achievements of the current administration, but we have heard nothing about the black hole facing this council's finances. If anyone is in any doubt, I would advise them to look at page 185 of the agenda that went before Cabinet in February, which is page 17 of the medium-term financial strategy. There we will see a cumulative funding gap for the year 2021-22 projected at 2,712,000, increasing to 3,942,000 for 2022-23 and hitting 4,921,000 in 2023-2024. The question was asked who should have responsibility for this proposed review. The answer, Madam Mayor, is every single one of us. All 48 of us have this responsibility, because if we do not address this issue, this council will be bankrupt. It will go the way of Northamptonshire. It will be taken over by the government. Let's just think about how this is going to work. At the member level, I personally see this being led by the Performance and Finance Task and Finish Group, which has already been set up. But it is not good enough that we just leave it to them. I accept that all Cabinet Ministers have a responsibility to look at what is going on in their own departments. And I would like to step back a little bit further in time to 2006. What happened in 2006 was that there was a new Conservative administration. It was 2 years before I came on this council. The leader was Councillor Roy Taylor. The portfolio holder for resources was Councillor Roger Whittaker. They carried out a fundamental review of this council's finances because they could see a black hole looming at that point. The result of that review was that this council was able to get through the 2008-2009 crash. We were able to freeze council tax for a number of years. But that kind of review is what needs to be done now. So I listened at the Cabinet meeting in February. I listened to what Councillor Sadler had to say. He said, quite rightly, we will need to find savings or revenue increases of 10 to 15% of our annual £18 million budget. Good, I agree with him. But what he then went on to say is, well, we have £18.1 million of revenue reserves. We have time to do this and don't need to rush it in 1 year. Now, relying on the fact that we have £18.1 million worth of reserves is an old tune which Councillor Sadler has played in this chamber year on year for all the time that I have been on this council. The problem is this cannot last. £18.1 million of reserves is less than this council spends in 1 year. If we find ourselves with a black hole of nearly £5 million in 2023-2024, that is coming close, that's certainly more than a quarter and heading to a third of our reserves wiped out. This council, Madam Mayor, does not run a profit, and therefore there is no realistic chance of those reserves increasing in the immediate future. And it is simply not good enough to say, well, let's wait and see what the government decides to do. It's quite right that we have the fair funding review coming on in the near future, and we don't know what the government is planning. They are talking to us about the possibility that we will be allowed to retain a certain amount of our business rates. That would actually be rather good, because a lot of our businesses wonder what we do with the money, and of course what we do with it is we pass it straight on to central government. That needs to stop. However, I think one would have to be an almost crazed optimist to think that if the government gives us more money, it will not impose further responsibilities on us. We cannot sit back and hope that the government will suddenly write us a cheque, write off the impending nearly £5 million black hole funding gap. What we need to do is seize the initiative now and make sure that we are prepared for whatever happens. I am sorry to say that what I have heard from Councillor Sadler tonight can be summed up in one word. That word, Madam Mayor, is complacency. What I simply do not understand is why Councillor Sadler is surprised by this motion. We need a commitment today to examine what we are spending and whether there are savings that we can make and whether there are things that can be done differently. Given that Councillor Sadler has already said that a review will happen anyway, in my submission, Madam Mayor, it is irresponsible for him not to have proposed it himself as part of this budget. And it is absolutely perverse that he will not support the terms of this recommendation now. And therefore I'd urge all members to support the recommendation.
Councillor Brown, I propose to put this amendment to the vote. Councillor Sadler. It's going to the vote right now, and it'll be a recorded vote, as I think all votes are when it's to do with the budget. So just pause for a moment while we get that in order. You're going to explain for and against. Right.
I can introduce it.
Yeah.
Members, just to be clear, you're voting on the proposed amendment to the Cabinet recommendations in respect of the revenue and capital budget and council tax for 2020-21. An additional recommendation, if you're saying you want to support that, then you should say for, and obviously against if you are against it.
Councillor Ms Ahmed. Councillor Archer. Councillor Axton. Councillor Bax. Councillor Tricia Bland. Councillor James Brown. Councillor Burley. Councillor Mrs Butler. Councillor Chappell. Councillor Chain. Councillor Coombs. Councillor Mrs Cross. Councillor Davis. Councillor Dearlove. Councillor Mrs Elmer. Councillor Fairbank. Councillor Green. Councillor Haig Brown. Councillor Harman. Councillor Houston. Councillor Howard. Councillor James. Councillor Mrs Kapadia. Councillor Kelly. Councillor Kapitko. Councillor Rachel Lake. Councillor Lewis. Councillor Mrs MacLeod. Councillor Mrs Marshall. Councillor Mrs Ruth Mitchell. Councillor Popham.
Abstain.
Councillor Mrs Randolph. Councillor Mrs Richardson. Councillor Rollings. Councillor Sadler. Councillor Selleck. Councillor Mrs Sheldon.
Abstain.
Councillor Mrs Shipley. Councillor Tilling. Councillor Mrs Turner. Councillor Waugh. Councillor Williams. Councillor Woolgar. Councillor Mrs Yelner. Thank you.
Yeah. So amendments lost.
416 against is 25 abstentions. So it's lost.
Right, the amendment is lost. There were 3 abstentions, 16 votes for the amendment and 25 against. So we move on to the debate on the main proposals, recommendations. I don't think Councillor Sadler needs to come back and say any more, but several members had indicated they wished to speak.